Yeah, it's good to have you on the channel. What do you go by, and what is your name?
I go by Evelyn or Eve. Um,
Mhm.
However, most people think that my actual name is Strega, but Strega is just Italian for witch. So,
Strega is a really cool name, and I actually didn't know that it was Italian for witch,
Mhm.
and I was like, that's a really cool name. But Strega Evelyn, that yeah, it just goes together very well. But yeah, so you said that you grew up around witchcraft or as a witch. Did you feel alienated from other spiritual communities around you? And how did this vibe of being a witch? How did that blossom in you as an individual over time? Like was it something that you had to learn about, or was it something that you just felt and then you started doing spiritual practices? Kind of which was it?
yeah, I mean it wasn't. I mean, yeah, I grew up around witches, right? So it would be my grandmother, my great grandmother, and so on and so forth. Who married my grandfather, who actually would have been considered, and we're talking about the south of the United States, by the way, right? So around the Ozark Mountain area. My grandfather would have been considered a water witch, and he did work for the actual water department for about 45, 50 years.
Mhm.
Because back then, that kind of, I don't know if you know what being a water witch is.
Not at all.
Okay,
Not
so
at
it's
all.
basically, and probably this you will know, most people go, oh, yeah, but they basically have like two rods, and they used to ask people to kind of use their power, so to speak, and the rods and the energy that would come through them and the rods to find water that was underground.
Yeah, yeah. So I've used dowsing rods in graveyards quite a bit. So yeah, for
Right.
sure in my own practice. Genealogists also use dowsing rods, interestingly enough. But yeah, for sure.
And so this was something that many years ago, of course, was used a lot. Now, not so much, but there are still people who, are far enough out and are into the folk magic in the old times and this kind of thing, and that's still something that they use to find water underground when they're looking for water. But that would have been my grandfather. But yeah, I'm also half Cherokee Choctaw. So it wasn't just the Italian side, of course. So like my uncle would kind of, he was more Cherokee Choctaw, more of the native side of things. That's just how he connected. It was his deal. And so he would kind of disappear into the woods and the mountains for however long. And we lived out in the country, and we were basically like country people or mountain people or forest people, however you want to word it. And so we didn't have a ton of neighbors. If we had neighbors, it was like people we were related to,
Mhm.
literally. Um, so he
Cousins,
Yeah,
cousins are like
well,
yeah.
so basically, my grandparents owned this massive piece of land, and so they would sell pieces of it to family members. So we
Mhm.
would all just build houses, right? We were just, yeah, it's a very southern story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, yes, I did actually live next door to one of my cousins.
Like a clan or a tribe.
Uh, I don't know. Maybe we were a coven. I'm not sure what we were. But yeah, I mean, we were all just very, very close when I was a little kid. Um, but yeah, but we lived way far out, and back then, I mean, that wasn't like easy access to town. It wasn't, it was out there. And so a lot of the food that we had, we either grew it or we hunted it. And so when my uncle would disappear, he would always come back with like, stuff to eat. So we would have deer chili, kind of like people have turkey on Thanksgiving. You will be eating this for the next 5 years, kind of thing.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Y'all must have had some crazy meat lockers if it was 5 years, or if it was so
was
like
every
so
five
it had to
years.
be smoked, right? It had to be smoked,
Yeah,
or
when I was a little kid, I didn't know. I would just see them kind of pull up with the truck and have all of this whatever. And my grandfather was probably the best gardener I think I've ever known in my life. The man could grow
Good
anything.
sign.
And
It's a good
yeah,
sign.
he would grow it well. And so he had acres of just garden land. And, back then everybody did everything by hand, right? You didn't have all these like amazing machines to do stuff with you. Like the best machine, the only machine he had, I think, was a really old school tiller.
Mhm.
So that he didn't have to literally,
All these jagged blades on it that when you
yeah,
kind of
like,
like it kind of spins. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I've
really
definitely
old
seen one of
school.
those. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And he would do everything by hand and he would do it every year. And so we would have just loads of vegetables and fruits and whatever. And grandmother, of course, knew how to conserve anything and everything. So the whole garage area was really mostly just storage of like different types of canned foods, the meat, like you were saying. So they have like the extra freezers out there for certain meat. They had stuff. I mean, you know, it was crazy. You'd walk into the garage and it
Did
was
you
like
have
an old
basements,
school
or was it
grocery
because
store.
it's what? Did you have basements, or because it was the South, there wasn't as many basements? I mean, like,
They didn't have a basement, they had a cellar.
ah, I don't know the distinction, but I'm sure that you can explain it.
So the cellar was actually not part of the house itself. It's on the same land, and it's really, I think, what they wanted to use it for was storms, right? Because we're a tornado alley here, and so they needed somewhere safe to go, and it was made of concrete, so wasn't going anywhere, right? So the only part of the cellar you could see would be like just the hump of it, and then the rest was underground.
Mhm.
Yeah, so not a basement, but it's close.
That makes sense. I've always lived in like North Texas, so I don't really know the difference between a cellar or a basement, to be honest.
Right.
I've never really gone that far.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think I get the distinction. So when at what age did you start to kind of learn about the spiritual uses of plants, or the spirits that you call to through the plants, and then perhaps honoring the animals that you get the meat from? When did these like very basic but very intrinsic parts of something that we might call shamanism start
Mhm.
happening, that could later attribute to witchcraft that a lot of other people use the name of?
Yeah, I think, we were just little kids and we learned by example. So, my uncle was really big on don't kill it if you don't need to. I mean, unless it's literally trying to kill you or you've got to eat, you've got to feed your family, right? And he was very big into be thankful. In fact, my whole family was like that. It didn't matter what it was. So if you were eating food that grew, then we were very, very thankful for the food. And if we, you know what I mean? Like it didn't matter if it was something you had to kill to eat or if it was something you grew to eat. Either way, something was provided to you, right? So they were major big on thank you. Like you could
A
not sit at the
reciprocity
table
with
without
nature.
saying it.
Yeah.
you
So
know,
like a reciprocity with nature, right?
yeah, absolutely. Really big on that. And I think some of that, yes, okay, it comes from witchcraft. Yes, okay, it comes from, the Cherokee, Choctaw, and the natives. But I think it also came from, people who understood what it was to be without, right? Because we're talking about my grandparents and my great grandparents and people who were much older and lived through horrid times where I'm sure there were times they absolutely starved, right? So I think that was part of it too. And we didn't waste anything, ever. There was always something you could do with whatever it was. And so, and actually, it's funny because my uncle was really big on that. And so we would have to use every part of the animal, right? You don't throw anything away. And to this day, that's still how it works in my household. I'm like, don't throw those bones away. My my friends come over to eat. Literally, I will invite people over to eat, and they've just known me so well for so long that they will be like, Evelyn, do you want these bones or do you want me to throw them in the trash? So they know that's just how I am. But my uncle would like gift us, he used to give us squirrel tails, that had kind of a protection luck meaning from him.
For anybody who doesn't know, what could you use something like a chicken bone for? Like how many different uses for like a chicken bone are there?
I mean, just off the top of my head, I've got a whole pile of them over here, by the way, in the floor, which is directly in front of my get eight, which doesn't have anything to do with witchcraft, but there's one use right there, right? And there's tons
Mhm.
of them. And then the other would be like a death oil, which I have made tons of for different people. Um, Obviously, because it was something that died, and here we are with death oil. And many different spells, many
So
different works.
we're kind of starting from
Worry if you're getting creepy.
we're kind of starting from the ground up as far as uses for bones. So what you might assume other people know, I don't think that they might know watching this video. So when you're talking about offering them to the Gede or using them in any basic way that you would obviously assume that these bones would be used for, other people might not know.
So a lot
So
of time it's representation of something, right?
mhm,
So a lot, kind of like other items on an altar. Here's something I'm giving to you, or this represents something. And so it just kind of sits there and people are like, what do you need all that for? You know, but yeah, I think a lot of time you need a visual, you need something physical. Everything has energy, which is really important to remember when people are talking to you about growing up as witches or their witchcraft or whatever, because that's always in the back of my mind when I'm talking, right? And so bones have energy, have certain energy, right? So um, it kind of is like a representation of the life and death cycle, and it has that kind of energy and plays that representation, and it can be that way in voodoo or witchcraft.
mhm,
So that's kind of a basic. And then you go from there, right? You understand that something has energy and that it could represent something, or, you know, and that was kind of what we were learning as kids, were those kind of foundations of magic, that basic stuff, that everything had energy and it all affected everything differently, and it all made ripples and it all made waves and this whole thing. And that's what we were learning as kids, while everybody else was watching cartoons and I don't know what the fuck.
mhm,
you know we were running around outside, in the woods and in the country, and connecting with nature deeply,
mhm.
and taught to be thankful for it. And we were encouraged to feel it and process those feelings and process that energy. And we were encouraged to be one with it and know that we depended on it and it depended on us, right? So people don't realize, they think, oh, that's just country living. That's just how hunters live. That's just very native. Yeah, but it's also very magical. And that's the part I think like a lot of books leave out.
So like what would be your so this is going to be a hard question to answer. What would be your perhaps this might have a few sub points. What would be your definition of magic?
For me, honestly, the definition of everything is energy. The definition of everything, including magic, right, is energy, because everything is energy. And that is always my starting point.
So it's basically like transferring energy from one
Right.
like form
Transfer,
to
manipulate,
to another form.
right. And a lot of it also has to do with understanding time and space, right? It's a weird concept to think that your past, present, and future are all at the same time, but not. Like people go, what? But yeah, I mean, the definition of magic, I feel like, is just everything. It's everything, right?
Feel like consciousness and magic play an integral role to one another and
Mm.
perspective. So the perspective on casting a spell or making a talisman, I feel like imbues that talisman or that spell with its power. Would you agree, or are we talking about materials and consciousness being separate?
I think there is an interconnectedness with everything. So to some degree, they're one, but also separated. Again, something I think people have a hard time wrapping their heads around.
Well, so I feel like most people that think about magic or think about witchcraft or think about casting spells or making talismans,
Yes.
a lot of a lot of this I've done, but I think a lot of people who don't like understand it think about it as something that is very like materialized and very much attached to certain certain practices,
Yeah.
whether it be something like Satanism or whether it be something like evil pagan gods or making gods with our hands or something like that. They think that it's attached to certain practices that are set in stone rather than something that the individual is very much a part of.
Right.
So is the individual very much a part of the magic that we do? And if so, which I imagine you're going to say yes, then exactly how? Is there a way to quantify that for somebody who is not accustomed to magic or witchcraft or any of this stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously, every individual has their own kind of energy or their own vibration or frequency or whatever a lot of people would call it one of those things, right? And so you are uniquely you. And yeah, so anything that you do is going to be unique to you.
Yeah, so when it comes to when it comes to how you developed your practice over time as a witch, do you feel like there's certain lessons that you learned that you would like to transmit to other people as your practice developed? Because we talked about when you were small and like how you kind of grew up, but as you started to really learn at those intermediate stages, do you feel like that there are some lessons that you learned at those intermediate stages that could speak to other witches or speak to other people that are out there that are learning these things or going through these things that would help them?
Yeah. So I think initially when I was a little kid, it was about foundations and making connections and that kind of thing, which I feel like a lot of kids don't get today, right? They're playing video games. It's all very technological, and they're not connecting with nature and I guess the universe, if you will, right? The more nature side of the universe. And so as someone who's now a parent so many years later, I would encourage parents to encourage their kids to go outside and play, like, and everybody's always so worried, oh my god, if they go 5 feet away from me, what am I going to do? And you don't have to helicopter parent your kids. So that was kind of something, that a lesson that I learned many many years later because of how I grew up as a kid and how I see kids in the world today. It's really important that they get this kind of connection going. It makes them, I think, generally better people. For some reason, I feel like, and maybe this helps answer your question from earlier, I feel like it's really connected to kindness, um, because we find a calmness, and I think calmer people generally are kinder people, right? Because we're thinking first, we're considering other people's feelings first. So it's that kind of meditation, calmness, zen, whatever you want to call it, that a lot of people are missing today, but especially
For
young.
sure, for sure. And I'm very tantric in the way that I think, in the way that I relate to the world. So the connectedness with nature is the basis of compassion for me. And honestly, if I think honestly, we really look at what it is to be human beings, I think that is a connection to compassion for all human beings if people would really consider it, or their connection to nature, or why we are human, or what it means to be human. That it connectedness to nature is everything.
It is.
But I don't think that most people understand that. So I'm glad that you said that, because I think that there is a real need for small children to really have a relationship with nature that isn't just that this is a fallen world, or that nature is your lesser self and your soul was put here to overcome nature. Rather, that we can live in conjunction with nature, and nature honestly is a part of divinity, if not divinity itself. That's my personal view. Um, though I think it's hard for people with an Abrahamic background to understand.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very cool.
and unfortunately, I think most people in the country that we live in have an Abrahamic background. That's why I ask certain questions because I'm trying to see how they think that so that they can understand based on responses. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, so so when it comes to, I guess going back to that intermediate stage, now that we have the basis of, you should connect your children to nature, and that is an essence of compassion. Now that we have that, the next stage, intermediate stage, things that you learned on an intermediate level, or perhaps sub-intermediate before that, are there any lessons that you would give to somebody who is maybe just above the level we were talking about, and that would help them at the learning stage, going into another level beyond that intermediate or beyond that beginner stage, that novice stage, beyond that child stage?
Yeah. When I might have been 6, somewhere around then, very little. And I learned that your emotions have a lot to do with magic, right? And how you kind of manifest and influence and call it whatever you want. Um, because through no actual real trying, right? I wasn't even thinking it. I wasn't really trying. And it just kind of inherently, just naturally happened. I was off in the field, the country one day playing, as I did every day. And my grandmother had always said to me, don't go off to this side of the field because, there's poisonous snakes out there and this whole, there were a lot of rattlesnakes out there. And she says, don't ever go out there. Well, I decided I was going to take a shortcut through there one day. And of course, I was immediately terrified because you hear the rattles, right? I was like shocked even I hadn't then been bitten, so I guess I hadn't got close enough. And it was then through I think it was fear, but that really intense emotion that literally it kind of was like special effects in a Hollywood movie where everything time just kind of slowed down and almost stopped. And it was interesting to me because I remember like the picture isn't moving, right? But the sound is still going. So it was really, really weird to me. And I remember even as a kid standing there thinking, am I like tripping? I don't know how I would have worded that as a child in my head, but that was the equivalent, you know. And I realized just naturally, like my brain said, this is what we got to do now, right? I realized like this is my opportune time. I can run and that will be in real time, and everything else is going to stay slowed down until I'm no longer in danger. And that's exactly what happened. And that was my first experience on how my emotions played, my first lesson, if you will. That the things that I feel, especially if it's like sudden and really strong, right? They're very powerful feelings and they do very amazing things. It also was my first lesson in time, space, and a lot of I couldn't figure it out really how that all worked. But at least there were people I could go to, like my grandparents, right? Especially my grandmother, who is a geometry teacher for like a million years. She was an incredibly smart woman. I could go to her and be like, okay, this is what happened. And I didn't feel like somebody was going to tell me I was nuts.
Mhm.
Whereas it wasn't something that I felt like I could tell my mother. So that was another lesson. Be careful who you talk to about this shit because people will think that you're absolutely insane. These days, I don't care. Clearly.
I
But,
mean, but
you
you're
know,
older. You're not a kid
yeah.
anymore, so it's.
But when I was a kid, I mean, it's life is a little hard. People make fun of you and this whole thing. And also, we were told like you don't go around and talk to just anybody. You don't say the word witch, especially because we lived in the South and that was a very dangerous thing to do. And in fact, my grandmother probably knew Christianity better than the Christians themselves because that was her way of being able to hide that our family was what they were, was to be able to talk, to be able to just show up in church and walk the walk and talk the walk, talk the talk, and this kind of thing,
It's
and,
also
and
not that
fool
hard.
people.
I mean, it's intrinsic to survival, but it's also,
Yeah.
I mean, the way that most people understand it, it's not that hard to really understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, but she studied it deeply. She was very concerned for everybody's safety and this kind of thing. So it was really important to her that people saw us a certain way, right? But it was funny because you go in the house and there was nothing, there weren't crosses hanging on the wall. It wasn't, so you'd be like, okay. But yeah, but anyway, so there were a lot of kind of like wild lessons and things that I learned even at a very young age, that kind of sunk in and then helped me move on to the next thing. Oh, this is an ability I have. Oh, this is something I can do. Now what am I going to do with that purposely?
Mhm.
you know. So,
So it developed over time. Did you eventually find like teachers that weren't family members that you kind of delved into these things with? And like how does one find teachers in regards to either witchcraft or other spiritual practices? Is there a technique that one might use to find teachers so that there's not like this huge jump between either Abrahamic religion and then just not knowing anything and just trying everything oneself and then finding bullshit teachers and then finding good ones. So what are the marks of a good teacher? How did you find good teachers? Did you find any?
man, it's hard. I mean, no joke. It's hard. Because teaching in and of itself is like a skill set, you know. People think because you know something, you're automatically able to teach it. That's not really true, right? People go to school to become teachers.
Yeah,
So
for
it's a
sure.
skill set.
Yeah.
So it's hard to find people who just have the skill set to teach well, in general, and and that goes for witchcraft. That goes for anything. I mean, I've known so many Ugai Mambo who couldn't teach their way out of a box. It makes sense in their head what they're telling you, but you're kind of looking at them like, this is not, you know. But that applies to really anything. So it is difficult. And also we've got this kind of oversaturation, right? Because here we have the internet. We thought it was going to be the resolution to all of our problems. No, it's just giving us more. Um, the overload of information and the misinformation and trying to find decent human beings in this mountain of bullshit, right, is so difficult to do. And my thing is like, I can really only teach certain people the things that I learned in my family that are specific to my family, and that would be my son. Because there are certain traditions and certain ways and certain things in certain books and whatever that are specific to my family. In fact, I've got a really good friend who is also Italian and grew up with, and I'm going to say Italian witchcraft, but I think a lot of people's brains go straight to Raven Grimalsi, and that was not what we were doing.
I was trying to remember who that was and I couldn't think of
Yeah, well, he
uh, uh,
popularized it. Yeah.
as soon as you said Italian witchcraft, I thought of like old like Greco-Romano like pagan books that I have, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I was like, yeah, I like that. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
But but the thing with stuff like this is well, what I was saying is I have a friend who's also an Italian witch. We're very, very close. In fact, I call his dad Pops just like he does. So we're very, very close. And although we could talk all day and all night about witchcraft in general or magic in general, we don't share things that are very specific to our own families. So even with another Italian witch, I don't go, oh, check out this, book that my grandmother had that, my grandmother spells or whatever, It's not something that I'm going to show to anyone unless they're
I don't know any Italian witches, so I have no idea what Italian witchcraft is about. Like, I have no idea what differentiates Italian witchcraft from other witchcrafts. Like, what is like what is like different about Italian witchcraft? Just like out of curiosity, like that is my own curiosity. Like I don't know what Italian witchcraft is at all. Like what are the
It's
differences?
honestly, I mean, you want to kind of water it down. It's the same thing that makes everything else different. It's got its own gods and goddesses and its own little set of rules and its own. And I'll tell you, the reason why I said Raven Grimassi is because he kind of popularized it more recently. And prior to him, it was Leland who felt that he had met an Italian witch and wrote about his experience with her, which Raven Gramazzi then went on to obsess over and study. And then he mixed it with, honestly, what I believe to be mostly just Wicca, and put Italian words in it and said, "Here's Italian witchcraft."
Hmm.
Right. And I'm not saying it's bad. I mean, I wouldn't tell anybody don't do this, right? Because it's his version that worked for him, and then he shared it with everybody, right? But the problem was that that became, this is Italian witchcraft. And so now when you try to talk to people about it, they kind of go, well, it can't be outside of this Raven Gramazzi
Hmm.
box because he defined it and now that's how it is. And it's like going up to a Haitian and telling them how the fuck to do voodoo.
Yeah. So like if we were to talk about Icelandic or Norse craft of any kind, magical craft or witchcraft, something like that, we might mention the runes. What would be as pivotal as like the Elder Futhark to the Norse for Italian witchcraft? Would there be something as pivotal as like the Elder Futhark?
Sure, I think probably you're gonna get a radia is like the big we follow her kind of thing. And then if you grew up with it, then you would remember La Befana, which was like, a lot of people would call it Italian Christmas, which sounds silly, but I'm just trying to kind of put words on it so other people will understand what I'm talking about. But it actually is in January, and it is on the same dates as I think Epiphany or whatever, the Catholic. I'm not Catholic, and I know a lot of Italian witches, or I don't. They call themselves Italian witches, but I think what they really grew up with was Italian folk magic, which is a little different. Although I got a lot of that too. But yeah, so I'm just trying to, like, I didn't grow up with Catholicism. I grew up with Southern Baptists and raging psycho Christians.
Oof.
So it's a very
Yeah.
different, I mean, Catholics can be a little wonk too, but you know what I'm talking about. Get next to a
So
Southern Baptist
Southern
and
Baptist is a whole nother level of like
crazy.
of like ick. It's very
It is a
icky.
whole different level of crazy. I would have taken Catholicism over that any day of the week if that kind
For
of
sure.
gives you an
Yeah.
idea of where it's at, and you know. But yeah, but a lot of people did. So they will have like Catholic saints. It's kind of like a lot of Haitian Orozon, right? Where they have the saints out kind of and whatever. We didn't have that, which made us a little different because most people did grow up like that if they were Italian and had anything to do with Italian folk magic. There were always saints, and they used the saints too, but in a witchcrafting way. It was
Mhm.
like, oh, I can curse you with this saint as easily as I can curse you with, a god or a goddess. So it was kind of
It,
funny.
it it feels like the way that I would work with Saint Expedite.
Yeah.
Like yeah, it feels that way. But and the folk magic is very valuable because
Yes.
I feel like that's how a lot of people, that's like the in between point between where acceptance is
Hmm.
but in like a religion and then where like practical spirituality is that folk magic bridge. But I
Hmm.
mean I feel like that bridge is valuable, but I'm not really sure how other people view that bridge, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's where you get a lot of your superstitions that are really fun, and that's where you get a lot of your very like simplified kind of cute spells like your freezer spells, and like I remember that from when I was a kid, or
Whole
a
lot of
really
cinnamon involved in various spells.
yeah, and a really, really big one when we were little, especially, was the olive oil in the water and what the oil did, determined heavily whether or not somebody had like put evil eye on you, and just stuff like that, was stuff I grew up with. Or um,
Is Hestia still a thing in Italian witchcraft? Is Hestia still a thing? Like, is she still a goddess that's worked with, or is she known by other words, or is she not worked with at all?
I imagine somebody knows. Yeah, our big one was like well, and we also went kind of further back where it was like Tanis and Janus and all this kind of thing. But again, like my grandmother was bigger on you can work with any entity that you learn about. And of course, as we grew up, you were asking me like, well, did you learn from anybody else? Like, did you find teachers? And it's like, yeah, I had friends who were witches, but not of the Italian sort, or, didn't grow up with my family. So they got whatever version of it they got. Once you're into like your teenage years, yeah, that's when you're like buying every fucking book off the shelf, trying to figure it all out, right? So then you're getting a taste of everything. And teachers can be in books, right? That's essentially what books are. They're just little teachers, pages. And so I when you move from overseas and you bring your ways over here, and then you move from like the Appalachian over to the Ozarks and whatever, like my family did, well, you're going to pick up a lot of shit along the way. And so by the time things got to me, it wasn't just what our family had brought over from northern Italy, right? It was now whatever we'd picked up from the mountains and whatever we'd learned in the Ozarks. And I mean, so it was a weird mesh of things by the time it got to me. And when I was little, I mean, my great grandmother hardly spoke any Italian at all anymore. But you got to remember also that when people came over here, they didn't want to speak any language except English because people came over here to try to be American, to speak English, you know? And so if you were speaking Italian, you weren't being very American-y. You know what I mean? It was
That
that
that that
thing.
that sounds like my grandmother that came from Wales.
Hmm.
And eventually she got this interesting accent that was a combination of Welsh and Texan.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was eventually like now it's hard to tell that she's still alive, my grandmother on my dad's side, but like she came from Wales, but it's hard to tell that she ever came from there because
Yeah.
like the accent is so much just Texan now. So I mean, I imagine that it's the same with language and how it transfers.
Yeah, and so by the time it got to my grandmother, like, I mean, I don't think I maybe heard her say five Italian words my whole life. And so it would have been my great grandmother, and I was very, very little then. And I I was so upset, that I never got really properly taught Italian. I had the broken version of it. That later in life, trying to kind of reconnect with my roots, I went and took almost 2 years of Italian in college. And the problem, and that was years ago. I'm old. And so, what happens is if you don't, as I'm sure you know, if you don't use it, you lose it. And very quickly at that. And just like when I was a kid, there wasn't really, I didn't know anybody to talk to, right? There was nobody to like just sit around and flop out Italian lines with.
You didn't have Duolingo back then or any kind of
No.
like apps to
Mm-mm.
to help you along
No.
with it. Yeah.
No, so it was very difficult to hang on to. When I did go to Italy, I probably learned more just being immersed, of course, than I did ever in my time in college. But again, when I came back from Italy, who was I gonna talk to? I wasn't immersed in it, in the Italian language when I came back over here, and that was, I don't know, 2011 or something. So it's been like a long time, and I can hardly remember anything. And I can sometimes when I'm very angry do say a lot, quite a lot in broken Italian, but I but as my grandparents did. But really it's sad. And I have the same struggle with Haitian Creole. It's
Mhm.
I would although it's a little easier. I don't know how it is. I know more Haitians than I know Italians, but it is a fact. And
Mhm.
so, periodically I can get
I
practice.
think I know more Haitians than Italians, which is really strange.
Right? I was like, why is that? I don't know why that just like dawned on me. But yeah, if you any language that isn't your everyday, first language, you're gonna lose it if you don't use it on a regular basis. And
So
I have
tying this
memory
back to
problems
like
as
magic
it
and
is.
tying this back to magic and witchcraft, do you feel like you have to practice to? So this might be a dumb question. Do you feel like you have to practice it to get good at it, or do you feel like some people are just naturally like really good at it when they just like start off and they're just like, damn, they can get results? Because I just knowing certain people on my end and just knowing myself, there's been certain times when I got really good results, and then after that, nothing. Or like I've known people that got good results, and then for years and years afterwards, nothing. Like, is there? I suppose there's an X factor, right? Where it's the spirits or the Loa or the gods where on their end they're not making the connection that needs to be made, and on our end we're trying to make the connection. Would you agree with that, or how would you understand that?
Yeah, I think it can be pretty random. But to answer the first part of your question, yeah, I think there are people who it could be anything, not just magic, right? But we can apply this to magic as well. Or some people are just kind of seem born for it, right? Like, wow, how are
Mhm.
you? And then you got people who seem to have to try harder. So yes, these things come with practice. And I kind of relate that to like meditating. And you got people who fuck's sake, they can just be like on another planet, in seconds. And then you've got people who sit there like, my nose is itching, I can't concentrate, and this whole thing, and I am one of those people, by the way. Um, I have
I,
to walk to
I could.
meditate. I can't just sit.
The only reason I could tell is because usually people who meditate are like, I'm just gonna sit here, man. And then a lot of people who think about meditation is like, you're trying to be somewhere else or go somewhere else. It's like, no, I'm just trying to sit here, bro. Like, that's all I'm trying to
Yeah.
do.
And I think some people
People
are
who
just kind of
really
built for it.
people who really meditate are just like, I'm just sitting here. What are you talking about? That's it.
Yeah. And Leif, is really, really good. My boyfriend, he's so, so good at that shit. And I'm a busybody. I have to go outside and walk like 4 blocks to really,
Oh.
yeah, to, and I, it's kind of scary because I'm like, I'm so glad there's not a lot of traffic out here because I do kind of blank out, but keep walking. So it's like I'm literally walking and meditating, and
That's good as long as you don't get hit. That's
I don't walk
good.
into traffic. It's great. But yeah, so to answer your question, yeah, I do think that there are people who just kind of inherently have it a little easier than some of us. But also I do think it can be a bit random. I mean, the universe is a very random place. Science even tells you that, right?
Certainly seems like it.
Yeah. So you're going to have good days, bad days. You're going to have stuff that you feel like you can do really, really well. And then one day, like, why can't I do this? I do this all the time. Of course, that's happened to me. It's happened to you. I think it pretty much happens to everybody,
For sure.
you know.
Yeah. And then going off the intermediate stage of like lessons or what have you. If so you I imagine at this point in your life you have certain guiding star lessons that you have within your head. Are there any guiding star lessons that you would suggest to any witch out there that's just kind of starting out or might be at an intermediate stage, or anybody who's practicing magic, or any spiritualist out there? Are there any guiding star lessons that you would just kind of transmit to them through this, that you have to say?
Yeah, there's a lot of noise, okay? Especially with the internet. So you're going to feel pressured to know everything because I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. We were kind of touching on that earlier. You don't have to know everything. You probably will never know everything. But you've really got to stick with your foundations and your basics. This let's skip everything and go to let's cast a spell. Let's do love spells. I don't know. That seems to be a popular one, right?
It's
Uh,
very popular.
yeah, everybody's gonna do a love spell. um, it's just like completely leaving everything that's important in the dust. And I think people need to, I mean, think about it. If you grow up with stuff like this, you're spending your first years, not days, months, years, okay, of your life, whether you are totally knowing that's what's going on or not, doesn't matter. You are still learning these basics for years. And then someone comes along and says, well, you've been learning it. Here's how you learned it. Like, how do you now apply it to magic, right? People are skipping that. They're skipping that. And I just don't think that you're going to have very effective magic if you skip those parts. And as soon as people hear that they've got to spend years doing anything, they go, ooh, that's so long. I don't, because we want now, right? We want here, right now. Give it to me now. I want to do a spell now. Okay.
I guess that's how you
They
figure
just
out if
chalk it
somebody's
up to manifestation, and sure, you can have anything you want,
I
right?
guess that's how you figure out how somebody's really interested in anything is if like they're not really concerned about where they're going to be, they're concerned about like I really enjoy this. Like this is great. And
Right.
if they can enjoy the process, enjoy the learning and enjoy the doing without worrying about where they're going to be, I think that they found the thing that they need to be doing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people like ask me like, well, don't you think that everybody has magic in them, so everybody's basically a witch and all this? And I kind of it's funny because there's a saying
I've
about
never
voodoo.
heard that. That's really strange.
There's so many people ask me that. Like,
Really?
don't you feel like
Oh
there's an
no.
innate spark inside of everyone that
Oh,
makes
I don't
them
like it.
witch?
I don't like
Ah,
it.
like, oh my God, killing me, folks. Um, Gods. But I think this comes from people wanting so badly to be something, whether they're, you know what I mean? Like that just comes from like a
They're
society
fishing.
fucking thing. Yeah. But the thing that I always hear about voodoo is voodoo is for everyone, but everyone isn't for voodoo. And I feel the same way about magic and witchcraft. No, I don't think everyone's a fucking witch. That's nuts. you know I think that certain people realize a spark, right, and then it grows from there. They start doing things with that, and some people just don't care. So look at my mother. My mother is a great fucking example of somebody who I don't know, man. Maybe it just jumped a generation or something. It totally fucking missed her because I think I might have been like 7 years old. She'd come back from her, whatever adventure, and came back and just decided, like, so it seemed to me as a little kid overnight, well, I'm switching religions. So I've gone from this thing that you were growing up with your grandparents, which, she was taught all the same stuff. We all were. And to now I'm a psycho Southern Baptist. And of course now, I mean, I try to not be too judgy because I'm always like, well, she sounds so crazy when she talks about how God only talks to her and all this kind of thing. But I'm like, well, we all kind of sound crazy.
So this kind of goes into something that so I intuitively a little bit know about this, but I don't really know ultimately is
Mm.
that are some people just born to do magic or born witches rather than, or do you really, really have to work at it? Like, or do you have to find it? So, like, are some people just born where like they just know how to do spells where they wake up and then they start writing down words on a page and then they know what herbs to tie into that page. They know how to twist it. They know how to bury it and they know what to do
I
on
want to
top of
know
that.
these people.
Huh? Huh?
You to know these people who never have to study and don't have to work and are just blessed this way.
I've only known like one of them, but I but I mean like so is it so I suppose that I suppose you answered the question. It's a process of self discovery, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't just wake up one day and go, "Oh, look at all this shit that I just suddenly know." It wasn't, I mean, there were
It's
there
usually
were
schizophrenic.
very enlightening moments, certainly. I mean, like dying while trying to give birth to my son and coming back from that. I mean, that's fucking life-changing, right? So that's one of those moments where sure, you're probably downloading a whole lot of shit and getting a lot out of it, right? But no, I mean, people say, well, you grew up with it, so it must have been so easy. No, I still had to. The only difference was that I had a really great support system out of my grandparents and great grandparents. I didn't feel like terrified to go and talk to them about all the weird shit, right, that was happening over the years. I felt terrified to talk to my mother who swore up and down that, she hated her mother now because grandma was the devil and, that kind of shit. She went completely in that direction. So it was
Mm.
really weird because there was a good chunk of my life where I was right in the middle of it. My mom screaming, they're all evil, they're all evil. And my grandparents like, this lady's lost her fucking mind.
Sounds a
So
little
it
unstable.
was exhausting.
Sounds
Exhausting.
exhausting.
But no, so I think the real difference, even if you grow up with it, I think the one thing that you get out of that is some sort of people you can go to with the knowledge, right? People you can go to with your weird fucking experiences and stories. And especially when you're little, right? And I don't think that's something that everybody has when they're little kids.
But I feel like a lot of people are being born with certain like intuitions about their soul is having, and then they go to the wrong people. They go to either ministers or they go to school counselors, and they're misdiagnosed, or they're told that they have a demon inside them.
Oh
When
yeah.
in fact, if they were just nurtured, they could actually be they could be witches or magic users or people who are functioning but using their innate spiritual talent to actually help that functioning rather than rather than viewing it as something from a quote unquote devil. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. It is a slippery slope too. You don't know what's going to hurt somebody, make them better, make them worse. But everybody that you just mentioned there all think that they are in doing in the best interest of,
Oh,
right?
for
They
sure.
all
Yeah.
think, oh yeah, you need God, Jesus, whatever, or no, you need witchcraft, or no, you need Satanism, whatever.
Or you
Everybody
need
always
Seroquel or something
thinks
like
it's
that.
best for that person,
Yeah.
without giving much thought to how that person operates. So
Well,
that's
and then that goes
terrible.
back to psychiatry being a very new medicine, and also kind of spirituality and witchcraft being a very old medicine. But like, psychiatry is only like 75 years old, and it's doing its best. And I don't think that most psychiatrists or therapists actually want to hurt their patients. I think that just sometimes there's an over prescribing of medication when there could have been some kind of like spiritual insight replaced with that medication. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Uh yeah, psychology and psychiatry and medication and then the spirituality and everything that goes with that. That's a slippery slope, because you got a lot of people and mind you, I've worked with in that industry for many years, mostly with children, right? So this is when they're kind of like blooming and starting, like I was when I was a kid, kind of seeing these connections and whatever. Although you see that less and less today because kids are just playing video games and shit, right? Um,
It took me many years before I ended up in a psych ward, but I definitely was in a psych ward at one point.
yeah. But I'm noticing the one thing all these kids and that come into these facilities, right? The one thing that they seem to all have in common and that they lack is that connection that I grew up with, that kind of childhood experience that I grew up with. It's just completely missing, and you see that they've learned they're not to be very kind, not to be very compassionate. I'm sorry, but I just think it all goes hand in hand, you know. The way that we're raising our kids is just so bad for them and the world.
It takes a village,
No
and
kidding.
the village has the village has to be competent at their job.
Yeah, yeah, for
For
sure.
sure. So yeah, is there anything, just wrapping up our conversation here, is there anything else that you wanted to touch upon that we haven't touched upon, or any other guiding principles that you would throw out there to anybody who is interested in this stuff or feels like they've gone through a hard road and they don't know exactly what to reach out to, but they feel like they're on a spiritual path? Is there anything in those realms that you would recommend or say before we kind of end our conversation here?
Yeah, I think always be kind of looking out for balance. And I don't just mean in a very witchy sense that most people talk about balance. I mean literally in a lot of cases. So, for example, you know, you're going to run into a lot of people online who say they know everything about whatever subject that you want to know about, and you're be careful, find a balance. Like, you're going to get out of people whatever you get out of them. Don't try to turn them into somebody they're not. If that makes sense. Because when I first started this, I did not grow up with, right? Well, I didn't grow up with. That was something that came to me much later in life. And I'm one of those people where I will expedite. I will be, oh, this, okay, now I got to know everything now. You know, like I get really excited and I want to learn, 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 learn. And what that led me to do was, I think, more to follow people than it did for me to develop in my own self, if that makes sense. I was like, oh, you're a new guy and you're a mambo. You're so important. Oh my God. And you almost put them up in this pedestal and you're like, please teach me. And, you know, and you will believe any fucking thing these people tell you. And I will tell you, there's a lot of bad fucking people out there. And they love it when people treat them that way, right? Look up to them and whatever, it feeds their ego like crazy. And they will hurt you. They will use that and they will hurt you. So you've got to find a balance of, you don't have to kind of, you don't really have to be that, always be a follower, you know, find your place in it and take, I don't care if it takes you years, you know, study whatever it is you're trying to learn, you know, whatever version of witchcraft, whatever, I don't know, voodoo, whatever. There's going to be a history, there's going to be education, there's going to be a lot of stuff, right? And you've got to kind of just find that balance and be very careful who you're calling a friend. Be very, very careful out there because people can be pretty fucking bad.
And yeah, just because somebody's spiritual or magical doesn't mean that they're a good person.
No, and on that note, just real quick, I will say, a lot of people think that, you know, somebody goes through Conso and becomes, you know, a priest or priestess or Momo or Rugon, that changes their personality completely. And if they were a bad person when they went into, you know, Conso and they came out, oh, now they're going to be a great person. No, no. Spending 2 weeks is in anything is not going to completely change your personality. It might give you a little insight, but it's not going to completely
I
change your
mean, there's some Catholic bishops that have been in spiritual education for a couple decades, 3 decades, and still abuse kids. So I mean,
yeah.
that definitely speaks to the possibilities of what can happen if you trust the wrong people. So it's best to use your spiritual intuition and to not be abused physically whatsoever. I think that's a good message overall. But yeah, hey, it was very much appreciated, this conversation, and thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. We'll see how we dice up these videos, or if this is one video, whatever, what have you. But yeah, thank you very much for talking on my channel, and wherever you post this, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Hunter.